Hi, everyone. Just gonna give people a few minutes to join. Hi, everyone. We're just gonna give people a few more minutes to join. Just want to go ahead and test my audio here. Virginia, can you hear me? Cool. Got a thumbs up. All right, I'm gonna go back on mute for just a minute. Okay, so it's 3:03. I'll just start going over some housekeeping things here. And you may hear my puppy in the background, so sorry about that. So today we're doing the cost-effective steps to zero explained. So if you're in the right place, if you wanted to go to the Sustainable Building Week event from the Zero Coalition, we're very happy to be here with you all. And hope you've been having a great Sustainable Building Week, because it's already the second week this year of Sustainable Building Week. So this week, has a whole bunch of other great events. And I do recommend that you check out, if you haven't signed up already, Zero is hosting an equity, diversity, and inclusion in the sustainable building industry training on Friday, October 23rd from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And it's actually a 2-session event where the second session is November 6th, and that's for the same time from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So that link is on the Sustainable Building Week website and also on Zero's website, which is zeroenergyreadyoregon.org. So I'm just waiting for a couple more key people to join. So just a moment. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen because I want to show you all the calendar for Sustainable Building Week. Let's see here. There it is. Okay. So everyone can see that? All right. So sorry. So this is Sustainable Building Week. The second week is here in blue. And yeah, there's some great events going on. I'm hoping to attend quite a few of these. So great work, Sustainable Week friends. And here's the sponsors. A lot of these are familiar to me, probably you too. And collaborating organizations. So it's pretty amazing that all of these organizations have come together in Sustainable Building Week, right? I see Webley. Do you want to say anything? Do you want to say hi?
Sure. Yeah, this idea kind of came about because we have so many great organizations, as you can see here on our collaborating organizations list. And just a reminder that while we could all come together during this week, all of these organizations have events that happen throughout the year, and specifically Zero. And we highly recommend that you don't just engage this week, but you continue to engage the entire year with whatever organization kind of fits your needs, but also just, reach across the aisle and look at other organizations. The American Society of Plumbing and Engineers has an event that maybe you wouldn't think of going to a plumbing event, but they have some great sustainability events that I highly recommend checking out throughout the year.
I was on mute. Thanks, Webley. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. And okay, so that worked, right? Oh, technology. Hey, Ryan, did you make it?
I'm here.
Oh, great. Okay.
I just sent Alex Boetzel an invite too.
Oh, there we go.
And I'm in.
I need you all for this. Very important. Okay, so I just wanted to do a really quick, welcome to everyone and an overview. Are you hearing all that beeping? I wish I knew how to stop that. For people joining. So anyways, yeah, so the Zero Coalition, we have, gosh, close to 35 members now, and the organizations range from builders, architects, designers, nonprofits in the sustainable building world, and policymakers. And we're all uniting for this common goal of getting Oregon on the path to zero energy and zero energy ready by 2030. And so what we have been doing is working on, having several different committees that kind of work on this goal in different ways. So there's ways you can join in if you're, a policy person, if you are interested in the technical details. We have a technical committee that Ryan Shanahan and Alex Boetzel lead. And then we have a communications committee. So, I mean, there's several more. There's plenty of ways to get involved, and we do events like this as well. So we'll give you some more information later on. Just know that if you go to our website, zeroenergyreadyoregon.org, there's a bunch of free resources on there, including the one that we're talking about today. So we want people to take those and use them, spread them far and wide. And, just please tag us or mention that it's from Zero. So I think that's about all I wanted to go over. So let's see here. Who do we have up next?
Ashley, I'm ready to share my screen for you when you're ready.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Let's go ahead and just get started with that. Okay, so while Ryan's getting set up, I just want to offer, a big thank you to all the presenters and panelists from our Zero Coalition Technical Committee. And I think we could go around and you could introduce yourselves and kind of tell us a little bit about your work. So Virginia, do you want to start?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Great. Okay. My name is Virginia Munson. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I am one of the job captains and BIM managers at Waterleaf Architecture. And I work with the technical committee, just kind of helping out wherever I can. So,
Thank you. And Ryan, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Ryan Shanahan. I work at Earth Advantage. I'm the Zero Energy Certifications Manager there. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I also am the chair of our technical committee.
Thank you. How about Alex? Are you there?
I'm here. Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Birdsell. I'm Director of Sustainability and Operations with Green Hammer. We're focusing on single family and small multifamily projects predominantly. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And Mike, are you there? Can you hear me?
I am. Mike Steffen. I'm the Director of Innovation at Walsh Construction Company. We are a general contractor that builds a variety of building types in different markets. More than half of our work is in the multifamily sector, but we do commercial and educational, institutional projects as well. We're really focused on mission-driven clients and projects that serve the community, and we're very focused on trying to get our industry and our society moved where we need to go toward the zero future. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. And then we have Kelly Bailey as well. Kelly.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, Kelly Bailey. I'm with Anchor Moisen Architects. I work on a lot of mixed use and multifamily projects and mostly urban locations. And I am she, her, and I'm on the Zero Governance and Steering Committee and also the Technical Committee. And Alex and I are currently working on a net zero project, which you'll hear about a little bit later.
Great, thank you so much. So, so Ryan and Virginia will be presenting the 7 steps to you, and then we'll have some questions and answers from our panelists, which are Alex, Callie, and Mike that you just met. So, and I'm Ashley Haight. I forgot to say that. I coordinate this whole coalition, and If you're interested in talking more about what membership is like or have questions, please let me know. And my contact information, I think, is on the slides. All right, so I can turn it over to Virginia and Ryan to go ahead and get started. Oh, and if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we will see if we have time to get to those. Okay. Ryan, are you ready? Virginia?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm ready.
If we-
Ashley, did you want to go over these 0 slides, or do you want me to cut and just skip ahead to the 7 steps?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna just flip through them real quick.
Okay.
Yeah. Just talks about our members and our goal. Yeah, and the executive orders that we've worked on with the governor. Oh, and the equity training I mentioned earlier was put together by our JEDI team, the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion team. Okay. Yeah, and some of the free resources that we have available are in the Education and Communications Toolkit and several different fact sheets for different industries. This is an example of one of the tools, the one we're going to be looking at today.
And Virginia's going to take it from here.
Great.
Great. Well, we'll start with step number 1. So first step in our cost-effective steps to zero energy is going to be setting project goals as early as possible. This is really important, getting everyone to the table from various disciplines so that you guys can all talk about energy goals, be on the same page. We all have our certain expertise, and so getting everyone to have that discussion is really important. There are certain, again, those expertise allow us to have certain insights into different ways to save more energy. And so bringing them all to the table early is really important. Also, we have some great incentives from Energy Trust of Oregon for sustainability charrettes, if that's something that your project qualifies for. So it's definitely worth reaching out and kind of getting some of that incentive money as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Another reason why this is such an important step is that the beginning of a project is really the most effective way to get energy goals in a project. So as you can see here from these graphs, they're pretty self-explanatory. The cost of change increases the further into design that you get. And the best way to have the most influence, again, is to do it as early in the design as possible. Okay, next slide. All right, which leads to our step number 2. Once you've got everybody at the table, we're all on the same page. The next step is going to be optimizing the building shape and orientation. This is really important because it allows you to take advantage of passive systems like solar, ventilation, things that the environment will already do for you in order to keep your energy costs low. Next slide. Here we have an example of some really deep overhangs in order to keep the sunlight off of that south face. This will help keep the glare out of your windows and keep some of that heat gain out. There's also some very creative ways that we can do this. So obviously shielding your building from the sun on the exterior is going to be far more effective than waiting till it penetrates to your interior. So large shading devices like what you see, these wood panels actually move along the exterior of the building, can be a way to sort of shade your interior without having large overhangs, or using them in combination like this project here is a great way to achieve it as well. Next slide. All right. After we've got our building orientation, it's start designing our building from the interior. Having our high performance envelope is a really great way, again, to prevent that heat transfer. You want to optimize your window to wall ratios, optimizing your window orientation, and creating a continuous thermal boundary around your building is going to do all of that. So one thing to also keep in mind that we have on here is to keep in your budget for triple pane windows. We all know that those are going to be the most effective for keeping out heat transfer. Next slide. Here we have an example where we've got that sort of extended thermal envelope. We see a double wall system here. We chose this example because it takes advantage of having that robust exterior, but as you can see, it also has a very open interior. Just because you have a thicker wall doesn't mean that your space has to feel cramped. You actually get a lot of new opportunities. As you can kind of see to the far right, there's some new window ledges you could use, as a temporary seating or display area. So it gives you some new architectural elements to work with in your project. All right, and I will pass it on to Ryan to talk about our last 4 steps.
Thanks, Virginia. Step 4 is we're already at specify high efficiency mechanical systems. So just to reiterate the point from step 1, you're really putting yourself at a disservice if you start here. I mention this because I'm often brought into a project at this stage. It's already designed. It already has its wall systems, floor systems, ceilings, etc., windows chosen. It might even be getting built already. And what's the most efficient system I can throw in here to get to 0? Oftentimes it's too late. So there are some killer high efficiency mechanical systems, but I really want to stress how important it is to make your building do the work for you on a passive level by incorporating those first 3 steps. So for high efficiency mechanical systems, we're talking about a bunch of different things here. We're talking about the ventilation system in the building, which can be, hold on, I'm letting people into the meeting as we go here. It's a little distracting. So with high efficiency mechanical ventilation systems, we are potentially transferring heat energy from outgoing air into the incoming fresh air. There are some really high-end systems that do a great job at that, so you don't have to really give on comfort in order to have fresh outdoor air. The better the filtration, the more you can bring in outdoor air without bringing in smoke. I've attended a bunch of different passive house webinars, et cetera, where we're really finding that HEPA filtration is the only way to do that. So if you're incorporating filtration as high as HEPA, you could potentially bring in outdoor air, capture the heat energy from the indoor air escaping, and have fresh outdoor air at the same time. Other examples of high efficiency mechanical systems are, of course, your heating and water heating systems. So here I chose a couple photos of a Mitsubishi mini split system on the left. This one, you're probably used to seeing indoor mini split heads on the walls or some of the neater ones you can hide in ceilings, etc. But these inverter-driven mechanical ventilation systems are also now come in ducted versions. So this photo here is the air handler you'd see on the inside of a ducted home that's also incredibly efficient. And it pairs with an outdoor unit, not always one this large with 2 fans, but it can. So there's really no limitation to how to use heat pumps in a building, and they work incredibly well on our West Coast climates too. I like this diagram of a heat pump water heater because it really highlights the fact that you're taking heat energy out of the air and putting it into the water. If you set this up in a convenient place in your building, you might be able to use that cool air or dehumidified air for further purposes. So there can be a bunch of economies of scale here when you have a bunch of systems talking together, We've actually been seeing some really high-end mechanical ventilation systems that heat water, heat air, dehumidify, humidify, filter air, etc., all at the same time. So we're starting to see these European magic boxes, so to speak, here in US markets as well. But again, I want to stress that without your super building envelope that's been designed ahead of time, these systems are only going to take you so far. On to step 5, where you're selecting efficient appliances and lighting. I can't stress enough here where Energy Star should be the bare minimum. Energy Star also offers their most efficient products list every year. So if you Google this term, you'll find it on the Energy Star website, where they don't just have the minimum ranking mechanical systems and appliances, but some of the best within certain classes. So that's what I recommend going into homes and buildings that have really high targets like zero energy. I chose this picture of the temperature color scale of LED lights because I feel like most people are recommending and installing LED lights now, but it's still a little misunderstood how important the color temperature scale of the bulb is, or the fixture. So in a residential application, you're typically shooting for about 2700 K or 2700 Kelvin temperature. You can see on this scale that's pretty far into the yellow, which is going to be a warmer glow, and it won't come across as harsh of a light. For task lighting, you might be using numbers as high as 5000 K. You really only see these 10,000 K daylight bulbs in very specific situations. In a residential application, you probably wouldn't, but they come in really handy when you need to see really well. So potentially in commercial environments, I'm guessing, would be a great place to use some higher K temperature lighting options. Oh, I just wanted to point out too on the sufficient products, Energy Star has recently started rating some new products like clothes dryers, for example. So you'll see conventional clothes dryers that are about 20% more efficient than the older ones with the Energy Star label on them. You'll see also heat pump clothes dryers, which are up to 60% more efficient than the old models. So there's a lot of advances made, and it always makes sense to check out what the current rated products are. I'm totally willing to admit that you can get stuff from Europe that has not been rated by Energy Star, but I always stress Energy Star as a cost-effective intro scale. So our last step, after you've set your project goals early, you've worked with the building team to figure out how to optimize the building shape and orientation, what your super high performance envelope is going to look like from an air sealing perspective as well as an insulative perspective. You've energy modeled it with a consultant ahead of time. You've figured out what's really making the building tick. You've thrown in some really high efficiency mechanical systems and then moved on to efficient lighting and appliances. The very last step is offsetting with renewable energy. You can do this on most buildings with solar access if you've reduced the load enough. Yes, there are buildings in the shade of other buildings. And so there are some great opportunities for those buildings too. Again, you stress the energy efficiency side of the equation, and you could potentially buy into a community solar option off-site, work with the neighboring building next door, purchase renewable power credits from the utility. There's a lot of options, but the first thing you really have to do is stress that energy efficiency side. So here I included a photo of a zero energy certified home that we worked with at Earth Advantage. Sometimes you're getting inventive with how to design the solar system. They're not always perfect little rectangles or squares. You can see here that you can go over roof jacks with solar systems. You cannot go over plumbing penetrations. So it's pretty important. A pretty simple trick is to move all of your plumbing penetrations to the solar access side of the roof with the worst solar access. So if you have north facing roof plane, you put it there. But ideally you have south facing roof plane. If not, west is your next best option. And you could still get usable solar that makes it worth purchasing solar systems on the east as well. The north is really your only deal killer. Included a screenshot here of Energy Trust's Solar Ready guidelines. They look a lot like the new Solar Ready guidelines that are just now required for homes permitted after October 1st of this year. That was just announced by the BCD, the Building Codes Department. But I just wanted to give you a general idea of building Solar Ready into the design and with the project team early is yet another way to get your building closer to zero energy ready. So plan for the solar now, even if your customer isn't willing to put on solar right now. I firmly believe it's a question of when, not if you've designed the building and the roof accordingly. The last step is commission and monitor. So here's where I get to put in my plug for certifying to a third-party standard. Admitting my bias here that that's as Earth Advantage's bread and butter is doing building certifications, energy and green building certifications. But I can't stress enough how we can work as a trusted partner and consultant, any certification system with your project team early on. So bring us into the conversation early on. We can typically share a ton of useful information with the project team before we even start energy modeling. If you're hearing me right, what I'm trying to say is that kind of info is free. You're not running the expensive energy model to find out what's going to save money. You'll get to learn from other successful projects what worked and what didn't. And there's a lot of local and national building standards to look into. Energy Trust has some great info on which kinds of ones pair with their incentives as well. And like it was mentioned earlier by Virginia, they can offer some incentives to help design buildings correctly from the get-go. I wanted to include a couple snapshots here for my own home's energy monitoring system that I'm totally obsessed with. Just like having your little dashboard on your hybrid car that shows you how you're using energy might influence your driving. I find having energy monitoring at my house makes a big difference. We've certainly seen it play out in multifamily buildings too. But these three screenshots show you that there's just a wealth of data in the monitoring that you can get. So on the left is an image of the yearly data I have of solar produced versus consumed. The production here is the orange. Interesting, you'll note that September orange column is pretty small due to 10 days of smoke. In the middle here, I have immediate data that shows how much solar I'm generating versus what I'm consuming, and some little tidbits about various appliances turning on and off. And lastly, if I could show you my screen and share, scroll through the screen here, you'd see that this ranks my energy usage by type. And so I can really whittle it down, what's using what energy when and how much, and adjust my behaviors accordingly. And we've seen some pretty killer dashboards on projects like Orchards at Aranco and Tillamook Row, et cetera, where the occupants inside a building are getting a real score as to how they're doing. And they can also compare that to how their neighbors are doing, which I think is a pretty powerful thing. And every now and then you look at this data and something doesn't stand out right, and it's a really cool indicator that something might be wrong. So then you get to play detective and figure out what that is, maybe today and not 20 years from now when you tear the building apart or remodel. Ashley, did you want to go over this last engagement piece about Zero Coalition before we move on to the panelists?
Sure. So these are some photos from our past events. We did a tour of Rose Villa, if you're familiar with that. It's a zero energy neighborhood. So here's my email. and I can put that in the chat as well. There's our website, and we're also on the socials if you do that kind of thing. So yeah, we have a neat program called the Zero Ambassadors, where our ambassadors are our committee chairs and co-chairs, and they are able to, do some volunteering time. So if you have a project that you need something figured out, you can go ahead and find them on our website, and it kind of has a little description of what each person focuses on. So just, pick the person closest to your question, and then reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Awesome.
I think you do have some questions in the chat, Ryan. I don't know if you want to save those for the end or.
Well, let's take a look at those chat questions, because I think there's a chance, I'm looking at them now, there's a chance that we will throw some of these to our panelists, and there's a chance that if they're general enough, that Virginia and I might take them on. So give me a second here to read through. I'll just answer one of them, which is Nalina's question. What monitoring system is this? That one is Sense, S-E-N-S-E. They make two different versions of it. They clip onto the main feed in your electric panel. And then they have two more clips if you have a solar input. So they make a Sense version with and without solar. Pretty cost effective though. I think it's like $300 for the regular one and $350 for the one with solar. But I'd like to save these other questions about wall systems for our panelists. So our panelists have already introduced themselves. I want to remind our panelists to unmute yourself when you talk, and remind the audience that we'd love more questions from the audience for the panelists. I'm going to get the conversation going though. When you have questions for the panelists, please type them into the chat box versus raising your hand or unmuting yourself. So let's start with Mike Steffen. Mike, you saw us present the 7 steps quickly there. I want to ask you honestly, did we represent the 7 steps well? What did we miss? Where do you find the biggest challenges are, and what do you have to share?
Let's see, am I muted?
I can hear you.
I'm not, okay, cool. Heads up to those who don't know, but I'm partial. I'm somewhat involved in the committee, so I had a heads up. But you guys nailed it. I mean, your steps are. I felt like my participation almost wasn't needed because you guys had it nailed from the beginning. It's, that 1 through 7 is exactly the way we see it from, 20 years of experience now putting what we used to call green buildings together to begin with, energy efficient buildings, passive buildings, and now we're looking at zero buildings. You start with the basic building design, or in your case, you start with setting the goals, which is that's number 1. So in our case, many years ago, Reach Community Development came to us and they said they wanted to do, actually internally to their own organization, they said they wanted to do a passive house building. This was in 2010, and they put it in their 5-year plan. And then they made that the goal of this project that we ended up doing out in Hillsborough called the Orchards of Durango. But it was that vision and leadership they had that was instrumental in making the project happen, because without that, it wouldn't have gotten through some of the tough rows we had to hoe to bring it to life. So that is number 1. But then focusing on the building design and the basics, the compactness of the form, the massing, the layout of the building, just making a very efficient building in its DNA, making its orientation proper if you can. Of course, that's not always possible on an urban site, but most of the time you can adapt your building to its orientations, and then focusing on the envelope that you put into or over that great basic building design. And then, and only then, do you like real focus on putting the most efficient high performance mechanicals into the basic building that you've created. And then only after you've done that, do you like jump to that next level of going to the renewables. You do those things in a reverse order, and you inevitably are throwing good money after bad money. And so totally agree with this, the structuring of the approach that you guys have come up with.
So I want to push on you on the biggest challenge. I heard one little nugget there where you said sometimes the site provides constraints that you don't have control over. Would you say that's the biggest challenge that you've experienced in these years of doing these kinds of projects, or is it something else that's the biggest challenge?
Yeah, well, the most obvious one is the dense urban site that is highly constrained, with, it's likely it's going to be a building that gets built to its, site perimeters. It's possible it will have buildings adjacent to it on several sides, if not buildings tall, rising above it, casting shadows on it, which obviously has an impact on your solar access. And I think those types of sites tend to be drivers in terms of form. So if we think like on a generic site, if you had sort of a blank slate site somewhere, whether it be sloped or relatively flat, you've got a program and you're going to put a building design and a building form together that ideally is going to use optimum orientation, running the building east to west, because it's been shown that orientation right there will buy you 7 to 12% in building energy efficiency, just simply with that orientation. But if you're fitting into a tight urban site, those constraints of the site are going to drive your building form for, to a large degree. That said, even if your form isn't optimized for orientation, the way the building design gets adapted on its facade expressions and such, how you might utilize shading, or window recessing on the west facades or the south facades could become part of the architectural design of the building. And it's very important. And to the extent those things are incorporated into the design, you have an ability to find the more cost-effective solutions to achieving the performance goals.
That was awesome. Thank you. I'm curious if Callie would echo these sentiments, or if she has a different take on what the biggest challenges and solutions might be. Callie?
Well, I work mostly on multifamily projects. And so I think it's a bigger challenge to make this happen. And so I would actually say, the biggest challenge is finding the right clients, and affordable clients are sometimes the right clients. And so that's the project that Alex and I are working on, is an affordable housing project in Gresham called Albertina Kerr. And the biggest reason that it's possible there is because the owner wants to own it forever, right? So they're willing to try and figure out how to install the solar and offset the energy costs. Normally in multifamily development, when you just pass the energy costs on to the tenant, it's hard to find that money up front to really do the work to both create a passive house strategy and also then get the mechanical equipment, the appliances, just follow that chain all the way through. So from my perspective, the most important or the hardest thing is to find the right client. And like Mike said, I think oftentimes that is affordable housing right now, at least in the multifamily space. And then find the right financing, incentives, grants, all of these other things that are available to help kind of offset some of the initial costs.
Awesome. Thank you. Alex Boetzel, same question.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. We kind of left the most important step off this is finding the right client. Like really to make it work. You know, this is obviously predominantly the technical side. Like, so hey, if the owner has decided to pursue a high performance goal or zero energy building, what do you need to do next? I would still think that one of the bigger challenges that we have, at least currently still, we kind of casually wrap that in step one with setting goals early. I think what that includes really bringing the whole team on board, right? So I think there's still a number of industries that need to catch up on what that means, and that this is not necessarily doing business as usual, that like, a more uh, a heightened sense on communication and collaboration might be necessary to achieve this goal. Um, trying to get out of the silos that, first it's the designer, then the structural engineer, then the mechanical engineer, that it's really kind of a dialogue or communication between all these entities to achieve this aspirational goal. And that's why I think why that is important that this is our first goal, because it really means, does everybody understand that goal and what it takes to get there, right? So we kind of allude to them further on, like, okay, we're talking about building orientation and envelope and mechanical system, but really how does that all work together? And it's important because we're always, working against the clock, that this is really clear from the beginning, that everybody can go to work having that goal in mind. I think that is really still challenging, and that really goes on to the trade partners in the field who might not be familiar with certain systems, certain envelope assemblies, and we have to make sure that people understand that to be able to execute on it. I think that's still an important piece right now.
Thanks, Alex. You really hit the nail on the head for something that I wanted to include in this presentation, which is one of my absolute favorite things because it's hilarious and totally spot on, from the Orchards at Arinco project that I worked on with Mike Steffen, where in their job site trailer, there's a big sign on the wall that said, "There is no normally on this project." And normally, the word was in quotes. And that was obviously a message to everyone working there, as well as the subcontractors. But this question's for you, Mike. Are you still singing that tune on your job sites, or do you feel like the normal has maybe caught up because Walsh has a normal that the subcontractors can relate to?
Well, Orchards was that phase of Orchards was done 5 years ago. And the industry has evolved, and I mean, on the construction side, the design side, the client side, client's expectations, and the subcontractors out there as well. Subcontractors, they have it hard, right? I mean, whether it's an owner wanting us as a general contractor to well, it's not a question. They want us to go get competitive numbers and put 50 scopes of work together on a project and make it cost competitive. They want it to perform well and durably and high performance in the types of buildings we're talking about today. But that's, but the business aspect of plumbing or HVAC or framing is it's brutal. I mean, the cost drivers in those different industries are really tough. I mean, look at framing right now. What's going on with material costs? Just going crazy. Labor costs have gone up massively because of the shortage of workers. All of that. So they have a lot of things there. This is maybe getting back to one of the points that Alex made about those aspects of the industry, I think, coming along and joining this drive. When I look at our drywallers and our framers and our insulation contractors, they're dealing with labor issues and material supply chain issues. They're not, to be honest, most of them aren't dealing with the holistic performance issues. They're dealing with their small scope. and it's a very numbers-driven reality for them. Trying to make, I don't think, some of them are trying to make a killing. Most of them are trying to make a living, and so I think that's for the most part, that's where they still are. I mean, I would like to think that the HVAC trade had come along a lot in the last 5 years, but we're still talking to the same contractors. There haven't been any new stars developed, at least in the larger multifamily world. We're pulling most of them along on every project. And that's where it gets back to, there's no normally here, put a sign up in the trailer about that. If we were going to do another passive house tomorrow, we're doing a living building downtown for PAE engineers, office building. We don't have to have that sign up in the trailer there. Everybody knew what they were signing up for that project. Most of the contracts were negotiated. Many of those trades were involved in the dialogue with the design team during during design. So that's maybe a little different than, well, it's a lot different than the norm, even the norm in the multifamily world. So that's almost a one-off experience that we're having there, where everybody knows what they signed up for with the Living Building Challenge, and we're not having to preach to them about it, but it doesn't mean we're still not having to do a lot of due diligence and dot I's and cross T's with them. So hope that answered your question somewhat.
You did. And I want to ask a similar question to Callie. Are you finding in your role on the design side and less of the build side, how connected are you with potential pushback from subcontractors and other project team members? And maybe what solutions do you have to offer to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah. Well, we had a particular challenge or opportunity because we were working directly with the design build contractors from the beginning, which is different than you would do sometimes on these high performance buildings. And so there was a lot of education, and Green Hammer has been our energy modeler. And so Alex was involved in these early conversations, but we definitely had to get all of the team members on board. And really, there was a lot of education, even some third-party education with, PAE. We brought them in as kind of like a third-party consulting engineer just to kind of help set the expectations. And so those meetings were really critical. It definitely was a little bit of give and take as people kind of got used to the new normal. And then I think we'll do it again once we start construction. I think I like Mike's sign. We might have to do something similar in the job trailer, just to remind everybody what the goal is the whole way through. Yeah.
Alex, how do you feel like your role as the building or the builder or the energy consultant? Ultimately, do you feel responsible for getting the subs where they need to be? One of the themes we're hearing here is how many meetings and things are involved, and it really depends. I hope everyone's takeaway here is that it really depends how ambitious the project goals are and how complicated of a building it is, how many more of these meetings need to happen early. But we just kind of heard from the designer perspective. Do you have a similar perspective, or what do you have to share on that front?
Yeah, I think it's important, to get everybody's creativity as part of the project goals, particularly if it's something that's new to the team, right? So since we, part of this conundrum is the reason that Green Hammer has designed and built in-house, right? So we're retaining this information as opposed to like new configuration of teams. And because we've been doing it for a while, we now have our preferred assemblies and our preferred go-to mechanical systems. And so on, we're kind of getting to the place where even subs know, okay, we've seen this before, we've done it a couple of times. And that's really pioneering work that needs to happen so that contractors become comfortable with what they're seeing, because they're they're focused on their expertise and say, an HVAC contractor, like, look, I can't have people, be cold or hot. I need to provide adequate air conditioning. And if you tell me we only need this much, I don't know, like I would like to provide this much heating and cooling. We are talking about the cost effectiveness piece. And so alternatively to this education that's necessary, we saw also some more creative like contracting approaches, right? So for example, if it's a particular commercial or institutional, where you say like, okay, we're trying to achieve this exemplary goal here, let's structure the contracts so that performance becomes part of it, right? Some people in the chat room, in the chat alluded to it. And Kelly, you mentioned in the beginning, we have this first cost, right? That is the developer, and then the savings are with the occupant. Like, how do we deal with this? And we have to combine so that the savings actually have an effect on the development in the beginning. And for example, performance contracting could be one of them. But the key piece is that we're still not there, that we can just grab from a pool of consultants or team members, trade partners that immediately know what they're looking at. And so ideally we balance the constraints we have financially, with the goals and the creative approach that doesn't throw too many wrenches towards trade partners that don't really know what to do with it.
Alex, can you just give us a brief example of performance contracting? Is that something like tying somebody to a blower door score, for example, or did you mean something else?
I mean, that's a pretty big, that's a basic version where, for example, yes, you can have a builder say like, look, we want to wrap in a blower door results into the contract, and it could go all the way to that, like a certain amount of money is held by the owner until like a 12 months performance period has been has been gone through, and then that money can either be used to make adjustments to the building if it needs to, or it goes basically as a bonus to the design team or the construction team, right? So there's a few ways to do that, but the important part is that like what's been said in the chat, that we need to understand how do we tie the performance and the outcome to the construction and design, so that there is and that's new for the industry to understand, that we're actually looking at we want to these outcomes, performance outcomes, and supposed to just like, here's a complete building.
And are those basically just built into the scopes of work, or is it a separate document?
It can get pretty complicated, like since we have everything in house, we're typically not structured that way, but I've seen some of those. And I think it's a good approach to say like, okay, we go beyond, especially if it's aspirational and hasn't been done, we go beyond traditional contracting to say like, okay, we all working together to make this the best building and provide incentives for the team if it succeeds.
Great. Mike, Stefan, I remember being very impressed by the window testing that your teams were doing on site after install, with water and air and checking for infiltration. Was that a similar performance testing setup tied to performance, or is that a totally separate thing and has more to do with, say, insurance and guarantees?
Most of the projects we do these days have required independent third-party window testing that the owner, the architect specifies it, the owner implements it, and then if there's failures, then we in the window manufacturer or the installers are responsible for the retest. So till demonstrating passing. On some projects, depending on complexity of the detailing involved at the windows and the exposure of the building, we may do some preliminary in-house water testing. We have the equipment to do that, and our QC staff have the training to do that. So I think we did a little bit of that on orchards that you may have seen, just kind of do some things. And of course, you did the air leakage test at multiple stages. And before you did your test, we did our test, and we did pressurization and infrared, so we could identify. And actually, at orchards, we did identify some not huge, but some miscellaneous leakage, especially where the balcony doors were meeting the slabs at the ground floor. And that was 4 or 5 days before you were coming out. So we were able to scramble around and do some spot air sealing there. And of course, when you ran your test, it was pretty phenomenal results. So, so I think, a proactive contractor can, with a limited amount of resources, it's not like a huge amount of money we spend on that capability. We can do a lot of diligence internally ourselves to kind of, maybe do some of your work for you, or whoever the commissioning agent is on the project. And of course, all the different performance standards, certification standards have their own requirements. So, we comply with whatever the requirement is. Usually water testing for windows isn't part of any certification program. It's more related to owners' risk management. And so that's how that tends to happen.
Yeah, I was really impressed with your team's drive to basically dial in the performance testing results on your own and then have me just confirm it for the official document. Callie, I'm curious, from your designer perspective, architecture perspective, how much are you pushing on project teams to build these types of things in where you're testing performance early on? Is that something that you feel falls on your plate, or are you just after the end result and however the builder chooses to get there is up to them?
No, we definitely, we started having conversations with our tester early on, even to just design the tests, right? So we have tests that we call out in our specs, which we call out in almost every project. But for a project like this, air tightness is critical to success, as you know, in passive house goals and any zero energy ready project. And so we have like a tiny house that we will air test first, right? Where we'll test kind of like all of our different assemblies. And so I think whenever you do something like that, it's very important to get the testing in the spec early and to get it drawn early so that it's priced early and it's not a surprise, right? You really have to price those things in early on and just set the expectations too, right? So early on, you're talking to whoever's going to do the air tightness testing. They're talking to the contractor, and there's a conversation about what's going to be expected and when those tests are going to happen. And so, yeah, you really do need to think about that early, or you have no way of sort of guaranteeing quality or a successful result. I think anyone who's been on a job site has found, all kinds of problems that were unexpected, weird things where there's a little dip in the concrete and the framing isn't hitting the concrete correctly, or, just strange stuff like that. So that testing part is a critical piece of the success for sure.
I'm so glad all of you highlighted how important it is to not just have meetings, but to manage the expectations as early as possible and test things as early as possible, because it's just a domino effect. Just like we were highlighting how if you skip these steps early in your design process, you could have failures. If you're not testing early, which is something an outside party can do, you're also kind of setting yourself up for surprises. Now that we're past 4 o'clock, I want to make sure we get to some of the questions in our chat. Virginia, do you want to pick out one from early on that we maybe haven't addressed yet and see if there's an appropriate panelist, if not all of them, to answer it?
Yeah, let's see here. So we got a great question from Colin Jank regarding double stud walls. His question is, is a double stud wall typically more cost effective than a 2x6 wall with exterior insulation? Does anybody have any recent cost information that would be useful? And this one I'm going to direct towards Alex, because I recently had a conversation with one of his designers, Eric had done, about the Tillamook row housing that's featured right behind him. And I found that there was some really interesting conversation about how the thermal envelope or the exterior was created. So Alex, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I think in the end, it really comes. Okay, so let me back up. It really has to plays a role like with the size of the project, right? And what we're looking at. It sounds like we're talking about residential here, and maybe even single family residential, and this at that point it really has a lot to do, with preference, right? So an energy model would provide an R value, for example, that we want to see in an assembly, and that can be met with different assemblies. And then it really has to do with who's performing who's putting that building together, and who are the trade partners that have to deal with that assembly. So having said that, we ran through various iterations. We did double stud wall, and we arrived basically. Our go-to assembly is a 2x8 stud with 1.5 inches of exterior insulation right now. And there's multiple reasons for that. But a big one is, again, trade partners. If once we have a wall cavity on the interior that looks familiar to them, they just don't know how to deal with it, right? So a double stud wall can be intimidating to trade partners. Like, okay, what are we doing here? How do we need to work this? So that's an aspect. However, for example, if framing is performed in-house by a contractor, they might decide a double stud wall. I can have more control in-house that, for example, exterior insulation that I can, that gets applied by, a siding contractor, and they want to keep control on the framing, and so a double stud wall is more attractive, right? So there's pros and cons. The one thing that is always important to understand is the building physics, right? So as we put assemblies together, there's one way to looking at like cost and efficiency of putting that assembly together, but we also need to understand like where's that building built, because as soon as we get to a high performance envelope, really the building physics become critical, right? So thermal, moisture, vapor, like how does that move through the assembly? And maybe to not go too deep into it, but we have one layer like our plywood that is the most constrictive layer, and so to speak needs to be protected once we have insulation outboard of it, right? It's protected from condensation and building failure. With a double stud wall, our plywood tends to be very outward and cold, and there's more risk from moisture, like for condensation. So those are really the aspects that have to be like, what am I familiar with? Because it's typically cost effective. What works for everybody involved? And then does the assembly work for the area that I'm building in?
Thanks, Alex. We can come back to this if the audience has further questions, but I'm going to completely change the subject here with this question that I think is best aimed at Mike or Callie. So whoever wants to dive in and answer it, feel free. How often is the split incentive barrier the barrier for implementing energy efficiency strategies in multifamily buildings?
Can you clarify what they mean by split incentive?
I can't.
I think it means the idea that the entity who invests the extra money in the higher performance is not necessarily the beneficiary of it. And a good example of that would be if let's say we went from a code building in Oregon now, which isn't a bad building, it's a pretty good building, to a passive house building, and that envelope is going to have an R30 wall and R5 or R6, R4 to R5 windows. It's going to have a better shell on it, and and the better shell is going to cost more money, more insulation, more airtightness, better windows, maybe triple glazing. Somebody has to pay for that. That's going to be the developer, possibly the owner of the building if they build to hold. But who reaps the benefit of that? Well, if it's a for sale, or if it's a product that's developed by those who live in the building, then they mutually benefit. If it's a product that's developed by not by the residents, which is common in multifamily, the tenant actually benefits from the investment. And now the way that works in market rate, that would be looked on negatively by a developer because they get no benefit from that. Let's say the utility bills in the apartment go down because of a better shell. They invested more money in it, and maybe they can sell the units or rent the units at a higher level. So maybe they can capture the benefit that way, but probably not likely to happen. So the tenant gets the benefit, and that is a discouragement. What happens in affordable housing is that affordable housing developers are allowed to price their unit pricing is regulated, their rental pricing is regulated by various entities, but it doesn't just include the rent, it includes the utility bill as well. So the amount of utilities that the residents pay is factored as part of rent and utility allowance. And so if you can demonstrate through an investment in a better envelope, for example, that you're going to reduce the utility allowance in a one-bedroom apartment by $20 or $30 a month, you're actually able to monetize that as a developer. You're able to put that $30 into your loan, which then pays for the betterment. So if you look at it holistically, yes, there is a split incentive, but it can be diced a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And that's how they're doing Albertina Kerr. The assumption is the units will have no utility bills, right? And so then they're able to get that money up front to help pay for the cost of the solar system. So I think for affordable housing, that definitely works. For market rate housing, my answer is better codes, right? Like that's really the only thing I think that's going to move market rate in the right direction is codes. And I think that's one of the places that the coalition has so much to offer. You know, I think everyone needs to push on that as hard as they can because that will move the market. And then the other thing I think is kind of like the Earth Advantage score for houses now, like when you buy a house, there's a score. I think it's really important for renters too, to start demanding that they know what their utilities are when they move into a place. And maybe we even have rankings for multifamily buildings. I think that's another tool that we can use to try and to move the market.
Energy labeling is definitely huge across the board. We've had it on our cars for a long time. It's long overdue in all types of housing options and buildings for sure.
I want to, if I may, really highlight what we're talking about here. We did some analysis, on the buildings, that you see behind me. Many zero energy buildings will be more cost effective over the lifetime of the building, right? So I just want to make sure that we understand, if we would understand how to move the money around properly, a zero energy building is more affordable, right? Unfortunately, it's over a long period of time, right? It's like first cost is more expensive, but there will be obviously lower utility bills, but most likely also lower maintenance. So there's some other effects that shows in many examples that it would make sense if we would pay the bills from A to Z, from beginning to end. A zero energy building makes perfect financial sense, and just if we highlight that, we can shed light on how important it is to overcome this, because we're essentially saying, well, we're building buildings that are less performing right now because somebody else pays the bill in the end, and that concept just doesn't work anymore, and coming up with creative solutions to make that, to pencil that out, I think is important, because the technology is there. Everything can work as long as we make that flow of money, match what we're trying to achieve.
That was such a perfect lead up to Laura Clement's question. I think a bigger question is, how do we shift the mindset from upfront costs to long-term savings and increase market demand for better buildings? That's open-ended to all panelists. How do we make this shift happen? That's a tough one, right?
Well, I think people doing the math and showing it and demonstrating that it works would be the best. I mean, going back to what Alex was just saying, if you, let's say at Tillamook Row, you're making 100, or you're making, I don't know, let's say you're making $50,000 of investment on a $250,000 home that has to do with taking it from code minimum to high performance. That's probably more than you need to do. I mean, that's a 20% premium. Let's say it's 10%. So let's say it was $25,000 and not $50,000. And let's say you monetize that into a 30-year mortgage, and let's say that's $150 a month on the mortgage for 30 years. Well, what are the energy savings in the house over, like, just even the first year? Is it $100 a month? And so you like getting 2/3 of it back right there. And then if you factor it in over time, and the fact that energy costs are going to increase over time, and then at year 30, or whenever you hit the end of the payback period, it could be before year 30. It's all manna from heaven then, right? Not on the financial side, not to mention the environmental benefit side that happens on day one, right? So, but I think there's still not a lot of people who have just crystal clearly demonstrated that with actual projects. So that's what we need to see. Or it's one of the things that would really help move folks.
So education is huge, I'm hearing.
Yeah, and the payback calculators, right? Like the money, making sure that people really understand all of those cost benefits up front, with the, understanding how long it'll take them to pay off their investment. All of those things are really important. And some of the modeling programs include that now, which is a great step in the right direction.
Right. So I wanted to mention something similar, which is, at least in single family homes, there are tools to use, like appraisal addendums, where you could potentially increase the appraisal price through an addendum that looks at stuff outside of the traditional appraisal boxes. There are potential debt to loan value products that could exist and do exist in the mortgage industry. So we're slowly starting to apply in these tools, but it does take a lot of education to everyone involved, and outside of these little silos where we're all sort of preaching to the choir, right? So I think the answer is there are some cool technical solutions, but it's also paired with education. If anyone else has a specific example they want to share, please chime in now. Otherwise, I think I'd like to get Virginia to bring up our next question for the panelists.
Okay, so our next question, for those who work in multifamily as well as commercial, office, or mixed-use properties, how do these different markets address the issues you're discussing? So I believe anyone can answer this.
Well, I think Mike may have some thoughts here too, but in general, I think, like institutions, those are an easy mark. Offices, to some degree, same things. Oftentimes people will build and hold. And anyone who builds and holds, whether it's affordable housing or institutional or office, those are probably going to be the first adopters when it comes to high performance building. And so the great part about that is that they will prime the market. Like theoretically, we'll have a lot more subcontractors in 5 years because of those types of projects. Multifamily is probably going to be the laggard, I think, but it will come along. But, you know, I think it just goes back to what we were talking about. Whenever the benefits are easily reaped by the developer or the owner, it's a much easier cost conversation to have.
Thank you.
Well, I just think office development by its nature tends to be private sector, and I guess you could say there are institutional office buildings, but a lot of it is private sector and speculative and very dollar driven. And, you know, it's going to be a show me the money thing, I think, just by the nature of that industry. And certainly with housing, multifamily housing, you see that driver in the market rate world for sure. But the affordable housing world operates differently. They still are private sector, but it's driven mostly by nonprofit entities and public housing authorities to some degree. And those are build and hold kind of clients. So they understand the cost benefit that accrues to them if they do these better things with the buildings and strive for higher performance. And I think the other thing that's out there, certainly in Portland and in the Northwest, is a policy orientation from public funders to push performance higher as well for climate mitigation reasons and social equity reasons and such. So I just mentioned that because that means that there is some money out there available through those funders to help implement, at least to a small degree, some of these incremental improvements we're trying to incorporate into the projects to take them to that higher level. So, but again, I think it's going to, by its nature, exist more in the affordable housing arena than in the market rate world.
One thing I will say too about office, we do have some very forward thinking tech companies now, right? And oftentimes these are the people who are setting the mark higher just internally on their own operational footprints. And so those people are asking for better quality office buildings as well. So I think that's one bright spot.
And those people are showing that there's other benefits on top of building value, right? And energy savings, like increased productivity, et cetera. I wanted to go there with all of you. When I read stuff like that, I want, the energy geek in me is obsessed with numbers. So I'm always looking at like, so how much more productive is it? Like, or health benefits that are anecdotal. For our three panelists, how do you communicate some of these benefits that aren't water savings or energy savings, or do you even bother going there with your clients?
Well, I think with again, envelope first approaches to getting to net zero, and which to me is sort of like following a passive house path to net zero, which again I think follows the path you guys have set with the 7 steps. That is essentially, in essence, a passive house path. You've got a couple of things there that are above and beyond just energy savings benefit and water savings benefit, carbon neutralization benefit. You've got the health of the building. You've got active and functional and commissioned and balanced ventilation systems to make for better air quality in the building. I think in Portland area, we've been a little bit ahead of most of the industry, frankly nationwide, but certainly on the West Coast in implementing voluntarily through leadership of certain developers, better indoor air quality through balanced ventilation systems. That has now been made a code requirement in the state of Washington, and I think it will come to Oregon in the near future. And that's a major thing that was always part of passive house design and construction, but is really key, and it leads to good indoor air quality. And then the other thing is the comfort factor, right? When you do have a building that doesn't have drafts, that is airtight, and you have minimal thermal bridging, and you have really good glazing, the comfort, both thermally and to some degree, especially if you're using triple glazed windows acoustically, can be massive for the interior environment in these multifamily buildings. So there's a major qualitative benefit in addition to the quasi of the energy reduction.
Awesome. Alex and Callie, do you have anything on that particular subject to share?
Can you repeat the question?
So Mike got to it at the very end there specifically. There's other benefits that go beyond energy savings and water savings.
Yeah.
I'm curious how much of are you finding that those are major, that those have real value in your discussions with clients? Or is it just nice to talk about?
I think absolutely. I mean, people want to deliver a quality building product, right? And one of the places where it's almost the easiest to sell, like if you were heavy timber, for instance, is office buildings, right? Because there are a lot of creative office tenants who are looking for that kind of heavy timber or CLT construction feel. And then in multifamily, I do think that particularly like with the STC values of these triple pane windows, people are going to start wanting that. They're quiet buildings, right? The mechanical's quiet, the windows are quiet. I think they're very comfortable. And so I do think over time, particularly, as we have more case studies to walk clients through and can kind of introduce them to some of those benefits firsthand, I think there'll be some movement there for sure.
I think
Awesome.
I think what we're seeing, it's actually really interesting on our perspective. We're seeing more and more uncertain world. So really the resiliency and durability of projects, like health and productivity, are hard to quantify and really difficult to kind of make the argument how much is that, there's dollars thrown around like, in an office building, you're going to pay $2 more on utilities, but you'd be $20 more effective, efficient in terms of productivity per square foot. But I think that's hard to quantify, but I think something that's really obvious is the durability. Like typically net zero buildings need to be constructed and executed in a way that makes them more durable, lowers maintenance cost. And then the resiliency is like a really important one, right? So a few years back, I forgot, like someone was saying like, is this building unpluggable, right? Like especially office buildings, but it's true for multifamily residential too. But these glass towers, if power goes out, they basically become uninhabitable within hours, right? And so once we're building buildings that are more resilient, particularly if we use this passive approach first, like our buildings, residential, they can essentially go like weeks, even in winter, without heating because of the efficiency of the envelope. That is also hard to quantify in dollars. Like we are trying to show models in terms of maintenance and equipment that you have to replace less often, or if it's smaller equipment, so the cost isn't as high when it needs to be replaced. But I think at least that's something that everybody can relate to, right? Resiliency. But I think this is the whole green building industry trying to say like, okay, we have healthier building and better buildings, and at that point, We have other numbers we can, vacancies, right? Low vacancies. It's a more attractive building. It really comes to how is the pro forma then? What are the numbers that are plugged in, right? You could argue that you say like, okay, I lower my vacancies, and I can plug that in. Just like we said, we can increase the rent by the amount we're saving on utilities. So it just requires that people are understand like how to translate that to numbers, and then they can plug it in, and hopefully it becomes, in the end, it makes it pencil earlier.
Awesome. Well, we are right up at 4:29. Virginia, do you have anything that you wanted, any questions that you thought were came through the chat that I skimmed over that we should bring up?
No, I think we covered it.
Well, I want to thank everyone for your help. We really appreciate all the expert panelists and your experience to share. Thanks for helping out with the presentation, Virginia. And thank you, Ashley, for setting this all up. Ashley, did you have any parting words for our guests?
Yeah, I'm just going to remind everybody of the other Sustainable Building Week event that Zero Coalition is hosting, which is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the Sustainable Building Industry training. And I'm going to put the link to that Eventbrite in the chat.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.